Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. I'm Katie Shipp, and I'm so glad you're joining my co-host Susan and I for today's episode with the author of Sexism and Sensibility. Susan, how excited are you to welcome Dr. Finkelstein to our podcast today?
I am so excited, Katie. You know what a book nerd I am, but also the fact that Dr. Finkelstein takes this title and as an homage to Jane Austen. I love it.
So before we dive in, here's a little background for our listeners. Today, we are diving into an urgent and important conversation about the mixed messages, biases, and systemic challenges that girls face growing up in today's world. Our guest is Dr. Joanne Finkelstein, a clinical psychologist with a deep understanding of how bias, social justice, and mental health intersect. Dr. Finkelstein was educated at Harvard and Northwestern and now runs a private clinical practice focusing on helping individuals navigate these complex issues. She's an expert blogger for Psychology Today, and her work has been featured in the New York Times, The Atlantic, the Harvard Business Review, Women's Health, Oprah Daily, Parents, and more. She serves on the advisory board for Stop Sexual Assaults in Schools and has been a dedicated advocate for gender equity through organizations like the National Organization for Women and Planned Parenthood PAC. Her new book, Sexism and Sensibility, tackles the impossible double standards girls face. Be strong, but not too strong. Be independent, but don't end up alone. Beyond the contradictions, the book addresses the real dangers: being silenced, dismissed, paid less, harassed, and even assaulted. But instead of leaving parents overwhelmed by these realities, Sexism and Sensibility provides a roadmap for raising girls who are not just aware, but also empowered. Welcome, Dr. Finkelstein, and thank you for joining us.
I am so excited to be here.
Oh my goodness, Joanne. I'm sorry. Can I call you Joanne, or would you prefer
Sure.
Dr. Finkelstein?
No,
I'm sorry.
Joanne,
that just kind of
fine.
slipped out.
Joanne's cool.
So where have you been all my life? I have been a mom of 3 girls for 28 years. And my youngest is 18 years old. And I believe this journey, we have to keep learning as we parent and exist with our children. Can we start with your journey? What led you to write Sexism and Sensibility? Was there a pivotal moment that made you realize this book needed to be written?
Honestly, I think that it had been growing in me since I'm 6 years old, right? Like I live in the US, but I grew up in Canada, where hockey is practically a religion, right? And I have 3 brothers who love to play hockey, and I wanted to play too. So I asked my parents for a hockey stick for my birthday, and to my delight, they bought me one. But to my absolute horror, it was bright pink and looked like a toy version of my brothers. So I felt really cheated, you know. Mm-hmm. I have been working with girls and women for 25 years in my private practice. And what I discovered is that every girl has a pink hockey stick story, or like many pink hockey stick stories, right? So girls are so constantly unseen, unheard, not taken seriously. And it creates a lot of harm, right? Like I like to say, these are tiny psychological paper cuts that accumulate and become festering wounds of self-doubt. Mm-hmm. And so in my family, when I would push back or get upset at the differences that I noticed, my parents would deny it, right? Or they'd say those classic comments that I now know girls hear a lot. You're so, stop being so sensitive. You're being so dramatic. But I didn't then, right? So I would hide my feelings to avoid criticism. And it wasn't until I was in graduate school, where I started to really make meaning of my of what was happening. And a professor in my developmental psychology class, I love psychologists. They, big inspiration for why I became one. She said, I said something like, I was often told I overreacted when I felt demeaned. And she scribbled in the margins, that's what people say to talk girls out of their feelings.
Exactly.
It was so validating, right? And so, I mean, really, like it felt like the storm clouds parted, like someone was speaking my language, making sense of everything, putting everything in context. So I wanted to write a book that would open parents' eyes and help girls understand that they are not the problem, right? They are not broken. The culture is broken. And so I think it all just came together. Like I have personal experience, I have professional experience. I need to get this book out there.
I love
Amazing.
it. I love it. You really, this book is a truism to yourself as you grew up and developed and you circled back to that 6-year-old girl, it sounds like. It's amazing. In your introduction, you wrote, trauma doesn't have to be an event. It can be the invisible residue of growing up in a world that believes you're weak, inferior, irrational. I love this one, overly emotional, and incapable of leadership and making important decisions. Can you expand on that idea, Joanne, and what it means for girls growing up today?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, right, is our current leadership and that meeting with President Zelensky. That is supposed to be, I guess what I want to say is, we call girls overly emotional. We call women overly emotional.
Right.
We call them incapable of leadership. I think when you grow up, it's those tiny psychological paper cuts. I think when you grow up with people just, we have, in this culture, we divide human traits into masculine and feminine. And anything coded feminine is lacking or inferior.
Right.
Right? So girls and boys are getting these messages about the female sex and gender. And they start, girls start to internalize them. And over time, it chips away at your self-esteem. It chips away of your sense of potential, who you can be in this world and who you are right now.
Oh my goodness. You just said something that really resonated. Of course, my daughter was a 15-year-old sexual assault survivor at her high school. And she was one of the few people, she's part of the less than 1% who spoke up, got some measure of justice. But that has always been my motto. I want to make sure that Chessie gets to be who she's meant to be in the world. There's that analogy of the acorn. You don't have to teach an acorn what to do, right? An acorn knows what to do. It's everything else getting in the way of that acorn, what we do to damage it and, circumvent its growth, right? So I love that idea. And, you put into words so many things I've felt about, the word I heard as a kid growing up, which I refused to use with my children, was you're being dramatic. And boy, I was dramatic. I was an actor. I loved being on stage. And that was my varsity sport for many years. And, it really hurt because I took it as a skill set. I could be empathetic and inhabit these characters. So to be called dramatic really cut at the core. What I did make a mistake in saying to my daughters was, I know you are very sensitive to the world at large. And boy, oh boy, they did not like being called sensitive. And I meant it as a compliment. So we've had to negotiate, the terminology with each of my 3 daughters who are very different. So I think it's so amazing how you put into writing so many of these phrases that our girls grow up with.
Yeah. And usually sensitivity, right, is like a real attunement to what's going on.
Yes.
But because we have a reaction to it and we're going against what the culture wants from us, we're too sensitive.
Exactly.
So I just had a conversation with my son. So I am also a mom. I have little ones. I have a 3, very close to 4-year-old little girl, and a 7, this weekend he will be 8-year-old little boy. And it's so interesting to me because before they went to school, I had so much control over the messages that I was able to make sure that they got or did not get. Once they started going to school, especially kindergarten and beyond for my son, I feel like I constantly have to be on the defensive for messages he's getting at school from his peers, just from the culture there. It's a great school, don't get me wrong, but just something as simple as when they hang up their coats, there's a boys section and a girls section of where the coats go. I don't know why we need to teach kids like so early on that they need to hang their coats somewhere different. And I had my son is actually pretty sensitive, and the one day I shared with him, I said, Theodore, you are sensitive, but that's your superpower. This is going to make you have amazing relationships and friendships as you get older. Don't let anyone ever take that from you. And it's so interesting what we have to do as parents to protect our children from the outside world. One of the parts of your book that I found really helpful was the section on media literacy, and just how shows and movies and ads reinforce gender stereotypes. And I'd love to hear from you about, I know what you put in the book, but I'd love for our listeners to hear from you what parents and educators can do to help people critically engage with media and with the things that they're consuming on a daily basis to help build that critical thinking muscle.
There's so many things that you just said that I want to respond to, but okay, I will focus on social media.
Respond to any of it.
Okay, well, so there's the school bit. I mean, first of all, do you know that at age 5, girls believe that they are every bit as smart as boys, but by the time they're 6, they no longer believe that. You know what happens? Kindergarten happens, right? They are getting so many messages. And you're speaking to a study that I think I cite in the book where they had 2 classrooms. One was just your typical classroom. Boys hung their coats here, girls hung their coats here, line up, boy, girl. Boys' art goes here, girls' art goes here. Things are pink and blue. But the teachers were instructed to not say a thing about gender, not refer to them as boys, and just not do anything specifically gender-wise, to keep it as neutral as possible. And then in the control classroom, they had none of that boy-girl stuff, right? And within 4 weeks, girls were saying girls can't be president, they can't be construction workers. They were seeing boys and girls as very different. Like, it seeps in so quickly.
These kids pick up on it more than people realize. Like, even this weekend, I have the perfect example. My son is turning 8. He's having a birthday party at a trampoline park. He wanted to invite the kids in his classroom, and the school has a rule. Either you invite everybody, which is fine, or you can only invite the boys or only invite the girls. And so many parties end up being only boys or only girls. And Theo came home and he said, I'm not comfortable with that. I want to invite everybody. And I said, that's great. Of course, now I'm trying to find a place that I can have 30 kids for a birthday party. But I was so proud of him for that. And then the girls were coming up to him and saying, it's so much fun that everybody gets to go to this. And so just another way that it's reinforced. And I don't even know if schools realize what they're doing to the self-esteem of the kids that they're teaching.
They don't. I mean, there's research that shows that when a preschool teacher, right, or a kindergarten teacher, I can't remember exactly which, says, just comments to a boy and a girl, oh, you're playing nicely together, that it has effects years later. I wish I could remember the details of the study more, but I remember telling that to my children's kindergarten teacher. because
so important.
kindergarten teachers especially they're sort of taught in their education to separate out boys and girls and comment, boys and girls come up to the front of the class. Just calling out gender creates a separation in kids' minds. And we are wanting to sort of blur that binary and stop putting kids in boxes.
Yeah. So for the parents who are seeing that at schools, but also the kids that are maybe seeing it on the media, right? Whether it's their shows that they're watching or their movies, which I think have come a long way. But how can we as parents sort of reinforce that? My daughter is going to be 4. She's not quite yet in kindergarten. She is a force to be recognized. I don't want her to lose that when she goes into kindergarten. So what can I do now with her and also with my son to challenge that and get them thinking about it?
Well, I mean, it's funny that you're saying they've come a long way because, of course, in some ways they have. But, one of the things, so you'll see as I tell you some things you can do that in many ways we haven't come nearly far enough, right? So, I talk about drawing on teachable moments, capitalizing on teachable moments, right? So you might be watching a show with your kid, especially if they're small, and you might say, did you notice that girls solve problems using magic, but boys solve problems using STEM and their physicality, which is true. This is backed up by research, right? Mm-hmm. That the girls solve problems by using, and it makes it seem like girls real girls can't solve problems because they don't have magic. But we know girls are clever, fast on their feet, good at science, whatever, right? So there are these ways that you are showing them like, this is here in the culture, right? And I'm helping you become a critical consumer of what you're seeing. Another thing that comes to mind is how much focus is put on girls' weight and appearance in television shows. And that, by the way, is true even if you're, it's true among animated characters.
Wow.
Like,
yeah.
That's
right?
Exactly.
Like,
I loved the criterion you and your daughter agreed upon for watching media together. Can you say a little bit more? One of them was the sexy lamp criteria. That just made me laugh. I thought that was really funny.
Yeah, I mean, and these are not things I made up, but these are things that I found useful to bring into our conversation when we watch, right? One is the Bechdel test.
Yes.
Which is you have to, are there two women that talk to each other about something other than a man?
Yes.
Right. And sometimes the criteria is like, do these women have names?
Right. Right.
Because, so many, and it started off sort of as an industry joke.
Right.
But it's become like a thing because there's so many shows that just don't have women who talk to each other. And if they do, it's about a man. And then the sexy lamp test is like, could you replace that woman who's just sitting there looking sexy with a lamp? And would it really change substantially the content of what's going on?
And the thing is that even our youngest are paying attention to that and they're internalizing it. My daughter was watching Paw Patrol the other day when she was sick and home from preschool. And she said, "Mommy, which one of these pups are girls? Which one of these are boys? Why are there only 2 that are girls? Why are the other ones boys?"
Wow.
And she's only 3. They're paying attention to it. And so we can't, I think some people think, I just won't pay attention to it or talk about it, and then they won't internalize it. They're paying attention to it anyways, even with dogs that you're not necessarily thinking the kids are even thinking about gender. Mm-hmm. They really are. We have to have these conversations.
That reminds me of the part of your book where your daughter was really indignant about the junior master chefs and how there were no female winners. That really struck me.
Yeah, that's where my mind went too, right? Like, we think that we shouldn't talk to them about sexism because it will make them, I'll just speak to my own experience, but I've seen this across the board, right? That parents fear that it'll make their kids feel inferior or scared to be in this world, right? It'll sort of rob them of this sense that they live in a fair world. And so like what I would do is I would talk about like positive counter stereotypical role models, like a dad who stays home with his kids or a woman who runs her own business. But like over time, I could hear in my daughter's questions and in her disappointment that she wanted to know, right? She would say, why do the girls never win on MasterChef Junior? Mm-hmm. Or why do the loud boys at school never get in trouble, but the loud girls do, right? So at some point I just said, like, I need to give her context. I need to give her language. Otherwise, she's going to internalize that loud girls are bad or that it's okay to elect someone who has, sexually assaulted somebody else, right? She was 8 when Trump was first elected. Mm-hmm. And I remember her saying to me, in sometime around the MasterChef Junior comment, I finally sort of explained what sexism is. And I said, but lots of women are fighting against it and we're going to have an equal world one day. And she said, and soon we'll have a girl president. And I, mm-hmm. 6 months later, we did not have a girl president.
That was a pivotal time for our family, too. When Trump was first elected, Jessie felt like it was a referendum against what had happened to her. How could our country elect someone who had been, at that point, accused of predation and now elected a second time? And, what I didn't do that you did with your daughters was provide them the view. I just ignored it. We raised our kids in an expat community overseas at an all-girls school, international school. It was such an amazing experience because they were so empowered. Truly, and Jessie credits that international school environment with giving her the seeds of her voice. And I grew up in a home where my dad did most of the cooking. He was a teacher and he got home earlier than my mom did from work. And she wore a suit to the office, and they shared all kinds of household chores in the 1970s growing up. And I never got the pink hockey stick. My dad was a great athlete, and my Adidas were the same as my brother's, or my Converse. And my baseball glove looked like a guy's. And so I was really shocked in 2014 when my girls weren't treated equally in their school community. So it's been a lot of catching up for me. And I'm still living in it with our 18-year-old. And I want to just get back to social media a little bit because that is such a big part of their world right now. My 18-year-old's world. It's like my 28-year-old and my 18-year-old are in two different generations. The 28-year-old is not on social media nearly at all compared to her sister. And so you talk about that it's not, social media is not just correlated with poor mental health. It's actually seen as a direct cause. And with teen girls in particular, I've got 2 more years with my daughter before she turns 20 or 21. How do we balance connection and protection? I still feel like there's an opportunity to share with her how she's being played by social media. And she would not like to hear that. And I'd like to try to flip the script and have her regain her power over social media. I've the cat's out of the bag in my family. I can't be more restricted because she's 18 now. But is there a better approach for parents with children who are a little younger teens? And what can we do? Like all the things you did with your daughter, how can we catch up to you?
Well, I will say that I wish I had done more with my daughter, right? Part of writing this book, as I was going through, it helped me be more involved. But there's so many things I wish I had done earlier, because the earlier you do it, when you're still their hero,
yes,
the better. So I just want to say that, kind of what makes it so hard on girls, right? They're in this really important stage of figuring out who they are. Mm-hmm. And there's this unabated focus on their appearance, right? Which is a constant reminder that they're falling short. right? So in social media, and really every type of media, they're seeing these skinny women with radiant skin and cartoonish eyelashes, right? And so they come to think that these appearances are really normal and attainable, right? And they're inundated with products and advice to fix these flaws, right? These so-called flaws. So they end up spending tons of time and money and emotional energy chasing this like impossible ideal. Meanwhile, boys, right? They take a quick shower, throw on whatever's comfortable and functional, and get on with their day. And so they're constantly made to think about their appearance. And we know that the more other people think about their appearance, the more they think about their appearance, right? And self-objectification, which is when you're thinking a lot about your appearance, is a way that we start to view ourselves from an outsider's perspective, right? They focus on how others perceive their appearance, their scent, their feel, rather than how it feels to be in their own bodies. And self-objectification can lead to habitual self-monitoring and shame and anxiety about their bodies, which puts them at risk for eating disorders, depression, and sexual dysfunction. But beyond the body, it actually steals cognitive resources. Right? Girls who self-objectify have more difficulty getting into the flow states, which they need for performance and achievement. So even if you compliment a girl, you might improve her mood, but you'll impair her mental capacity, right? Wow. So online all day, they have people going, gorgeous, and that's if they're lucky. Like otherwise they could be bullied but either way, it just, it draws attention. Even compliments draw attention to their bodies. So
wow, that's incredible. Thank you for saying that. That like really hit me. It gave me chills that complimenting them can actually hurt their ability to sort of get into that flow. I'd never even thought of that before. And I try so hard with my daughter to find other ways to compliment her. Like, you're so smart. You're so creative. You're so brave, And I was doing that because I wanted her to get that inner dialogue, but I didn't even put that together. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Okay.
Well, I like to say to parents, and then I'll get to the media stuff. I like to say to parents, think twice before you compliment them on their outfit or how cute they look as they're on their way to school, right? Because we want them at peak mental capacity, but we have them thinking about their bodies. And it's worth wondering how often before they go into a math test or they go into a piano recital, that they get a body compliment.
Wow.
Right? So they're just all of these little ways that
people aren't even thinking about.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So I think all of this is harder on girls, both because they use social media more than boys and because of the emphasis that we place on girls' looks, right? So, which is another critical reason for us to raise girls who don't overvalue their appearance. I cover a bunch of ways in Sexism and Sensibility that parents can approach social media with kids. And one of them is helping your daughter tune into her feelings, right? And encourage her critical eye, right? So ask her to reflect on how she feels when she looks at certain images or certain accounts, right? Can they stop following an account that induces bad feelings, right? If it's a friend, the social consequences might be too high, but maybe they could start following accounts with empowering messages, right? Like #girlpower or stop sexualizing women. Right. So as they become more conscious of their feelings, the hope is that they'll choose more encouraging content and, then they will be training the algorithm. And another way is to share the research with them. Right. We want to encourage long-term habits. Right. So putting up all kinds of parental controls isn't really going to work. Because eventually, like you said, your daughter's going to be 18, they're going to go off to college, they're going to do whatever, and you're not going to have control of it. So you want to mentor, not monitor them.
Right.
And we can tell them that research shows kids feel worse about their bodies when they spend too much time on social media. Right. And you might ask them, like, why do you think that is? Like, just it doesn't have to be personal to them, but just a dinner time conversation. Like, I wonder why that is. And they'll be able to talk about all this focus on their looks and this whole idea, like, I think ultimately teenagers nobody likes to be manipulated, but definitely teenagers, right? So when you remind them that algorithms are designed to keep them hooked and can literally identify when they feel insecure or worthless and are vulnerable to advertising, just because they've, paused over a certain, ad for acne solution or weight loss or whatever.
I love that you said mentor, don't monitor. I think that's the phrase that you used, right? I'm not there yet. And I am so terrified of the first time my kids ask for a phone, because one part of me really wants to say, absolutely not. You are not getting a phone ever.
Yes.
But I also know that it's the reality that they live in. So for parents of younger kids, do you feel like there's an age or, a certain time where, okay, maybe it's okay for them to get a phone and start to look into it? And then beyond a phone, okay, maybe as long as you're mentoring them through the process, like maybe they can start being on social media. Like, is there a certain point that you think kids are a little bit more ready than, when they're younger?
I mean, I will say that you have to have, when your kids are very young. So of course you're going to be doing a lot more parental control. It's more when they're, but you also want to be there standing over their shoulder with them, talking about it. And so there's control, then there becomes mentoring. And then as they get older, like the ratio switches. Honestly, I think I just empathize so much with parents today, because we are the first generation who's going through this with our kids. We have no idea what we're doing, right? We're flying by the seat of our pants. So I don't know that there's like a right way and a wrong way. I think the longer you can hold off, the better, really. Yeah. Like high school, I think once they hit ninth grade, they're going to need a phone. But the longer you can hold off, the better. We were able to hold off with my son until high school.
Wow.
But not with my daughter, who...
Do you think it made a difference for your son versus your daughter with, how he engaged on the phone by holding off a bit?
It's hard to say. Like it's not that he didn't have anything, right? Like he had an iPod. I think that's what they were called, right? Like an iPod where he can do some stuff. And he is he's a computer science major right now. So I don't know, maybe we pushed him in that direction. I think there's so much personality that goes into it. Yeah, and I
that's fair.
Yeah. I think it did maybe help him not get involved in some of the social dynamics, but also she's a girl and there is more social dynamics. Yeah. And, it was during the pandemic that we decided to give her the phone because there was so much isolation. And
So before I joined I Have the Right To, I spent over a decade representing survivors of sexual abuse. And a lot of what I did focused on online exploitation of kids. And I had very young kids whose parents would contact me because a photo of them was circulating around the school. I'm talking 5th, 6th graders who were sending nude photos. And I read in your book that a 2020 survey found that kids as young as 9 and 12 were sending nude selfies at twice the rate of the previous year, and often to people that they've never met, which based on the cases that I had, I 100% can see that, and even younger, really. So that's a tough one. How do we approach those tough conversations with kids in that age or even before that age so that they're aware of it before it starts happening around them? Is there a way to have these conversations that, take place ahead of time instead of just being reactive to something that happened?
Yeah, I think, great question. I think we want to really empathize with the tightrope that girls especially are walking, right? Like on the one hand, if they are if they just take a picture of themselves and they don't use filters and they're not worried about how they look, they could really get dinged, right? Or get bullied. But if they, present as the it girl, which they feel pressure to, then they could say they look too fake, or, there's just all of these ways that it's hard to get it right on social media. When it comes to sexting, I think we want to talk to them about, I think you want to tell them that it's actually illegal, right? It's called
Absolutely.
self-generated child sexual abuse material, and it can lead to charges of child pornography because, like, the laws do not differentiate between predators and teens in love, right?
Yep.
So kids need to hear that, but they might just feel like it's a scare tactic because they know so many kids who are doing it, or they hear about it and they're not going to jail, right? So we really need to address a few other things as soon as they are old enough for a cell phone, right? Like for instance, you want to tell them that it's really usually just a no-win situation, right? And this is part of the walking the tightrope. If they refuse to send a photo, they're often called a prude or a tease or threatened with rumors, right? But if they do, then they're a slut, right? So you want that to remind them that no one gets to decide their sexuality for them, even though they'll try to. And if they don't send a photo, right, at least there's no damage legally or reputationally, right? Yeah. We want to tell them to always assume that the photo will be shared. If not right away, maybe next month or next year, maybe their friends will see it, maybe a college admissions counselor will see it. Like, the internet is forever, and you really can't drive that home enough. Girls often think it's okay to send nudes if they're in a relationship, right? So ask them to consider whether they'd want this person to have their nude photos if they break up, right? So that's sort of explaining revenge porn to them. Power dynamics in relationships can change when someone has something that can be used against you during fights or if you want to end the relationship. Another thing, is like a big red flag is if someone, even a boyfriend, is trying to wear them down, right? Just like any other sexual thing, any other sexual endeavor, sexting should never involve pressure or guilt, right? That's just evidence that their boundaries aren't being respected.
I read a study recently that if people are getting pressured to send nudes, that they're actually more likely to be in a relationship that will eventually lead to physical violence as well. And I thought that was something important to share with young people. I was talking with college students about this topic and just sharing that, that might be a red flag for something down the road in the relationship as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Joanne, the work that our organization, I Have the Right To, does, and we are working intensely with high school students, and we share with them that by the end of high school, 90% of them will have experienced harassment. 1 in 3 will face dating violence, and over a quarter will be sexually assaulted. I didn't even have the words for it when Jessie was sexually assaulted. She said, "A boy had sex with me and I did not want it." Yet, still, right now in 2024, even after Me Too, only 1 in 3 girls' parents talk to them about sexual assault and sexual harassment. Why do you think this conversation is so difficult? And how can parents better engage their kids? And what roles do you think schools should play?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do just want to circle back quickly to say to parents that it's also at a certain point, right, as teenagers, it's kind of developmentally appropriate to want to send a nude, right? You want to share your body with somebody, or you want to show that you trust them or that you're willing to take it to the next level. So it's not that they're doing something so egregious. And most kids who send nudes, nothing terrible happens. But when it does happen, it is really terrible. And so you just don't want to shame your kid, is all I'm saying. Like, it's normal to have that impulse.
You're amazing. That's really amazing. We don't want to shame our kids. We just want to be the lighthouse for them.
Yeah. And then, that does sort of lead into what you're asking, because if we inadvertently, in our wish to protect them, are shaming them in these ways, right, they're not going to come to us when something happens, whether it's just like feeling grossed out because someone catcalled them or they're actually assaulted, right? So I think we really do need to talk to our kids very directly about sexism and sexual harassment and sexual assault, because we lay the groundwork for girls to discuss their demeaning experiences and explore the traits that they've come to believe make them inferior, right? And we want to do that before they grow up with these sort of damaging perceptions of themselves. So we want to at least lightly prepare them for what to expect, right? Just talking about girls receive unwanted attention sometimes. Explain that sometimes other kids cross boundaries that make girls feel uncomfortable, or someone on the street might choose to comment on her appearance or say something rude, right? Both girls and boys need to hear directly that these behaviors are harassment and they aren't usually taken as flattery. Eventually, we have to discuss the importance of, and I think this is what parents have a harder time with when we're talking about sex, right? Being sure that your partner wants to have sex and is comfortable doing so before having sex, not continuing to ask someone to have sex after they've said no, or not having sex with someone who is too intoxicated or impaired to make a decision about sex. And of course, making sure of your own comfort before engaging sexually, which I think parents are more likely to do than the others, but they all count.
That's so important.
Yeah, we can discuss, why boys bond over girls' sexuality, sort of mocking sexuality, and kind of remind our boys, our sons, that jokes influence how we think and behave toward girls, and that others might assume we approve of degrading or harassing girls.
Absolutely.
Exactly. It's so important to have these conversations. I think, some parents realize that they need to have these conversations with their girls, but they don't realize the importance of also having it with their boys and starting the conversations young and then building upon them. You actually write in your book that men who grow up believing that they must adhere to rigid masculinity are more likely to harass women and commit dating violence. I'd love to hear more on that. A large part of our programming is talking to young men. So just what are some tangible ways to raise boys to embrace this healthier version of masculinity?
There's so many unconscious biases that we have as parents, right? And even like the most progressive of us don't realize that we're doing it, right? Even those of us who write books about this stuff do it. So like for one example is we tend to use emotion-focused words with girls, like sad, excited, love. But with boys, we use achievement-focused language, like proud, win, and best. Right? So there's all of these ways that we're unconsciously passing on, like competition is for boys, and being soft and having emotions is not. And so there's all these like tiny little ways that we're doing it. So I think becoming really conscious of your own biases and knowing what they are, that's part of why I wrote the book, because they're so unconscious that like, how do you become conscious of them unless you know what to look for? And then I think, how do you talk to boys about this without shaming them, without making them defensive, right? I think part of it is showing them that the culture, this sort of patriarchal culture that they're growing up in, isn't good for them either, right? Like I have boys and men who come into my private practice who suffer from, suffer from all of the same things that girls are complaining about, like, depression, anxiety, relationship issues, friendships. But often I am the very first person they've ever told. And it takes a lot to get somebody to finally go to therapy, right? So the girls have told their mothers or they've told their friends, but the boys have kept it in for so long. Right. And so when we are showing them that this is a culture that's not good for you either, right? When you have to be dominant and shut girls down, it affects your relationships.
100%. That is like a great piece of advice. And that's what we're doing with our work with boys in schools right now. And my husband Alex is working on this with a variety of young men in high school, and you'll hear them talk about this on the other stream of our podcast about what is a real man to these young men. And it's really beautiful to listen to these boys talk about their feelings and their hopes and their dreams for their future. So I couldn't agree with you more, Joanne. It is the carrot. You will do better in your emotional life if you can access your full humanity and not just the socially conscripted idea of what it means to be a man. And, you know, I would just go back to that first image you gave us of our president and his bullying tactics in the Oval Office. And, you know, what are our children to make of that?
Yeah. You know, I'm sorry to interrupt. My mind had gone right there too, because he was so bullying. And then I don't want to misquote because I can't remember exactly who it is, but one of those people from the manosphere said, that isn't bullying, that is being a man. And I just, for all the boys out there, it's just like my heart breaks that they believe that they're being taught that they have to dominate in order to be a man.
Wow, I need to find out who said that too, because that's a tragic statement.
And it was all over social media.
Wow, I missed that.
I remember when he first ran, my son was pretty young, and he looked at the TV and he heard him speaking and didn't really have any context because he was only a few years old. And he said, he was at my mom's house because my mom was watching him, and he said, Grammy, who is that? He's a bully. He's a bully, Grammy. Look at that.
Wow.
And he was young, and he picked up on that so quickly. And how scary is it that just a few years later, as an older kid, you know, some people are taking that as, no, that's not a bully. That's a man. I hope that my son never hears that messaging. And if he does, I hope he knows, and I can do everything I can, and my husband, to combat that kind of language, because it's awful.
But here is what he's going to hear, right? He will hear it, and he'll have you, thankfully, in his ear, and all the years that you've done sort of trying to undo this. But he will hear, like, imagine if he's a teenager and he's lonely, partly because it's normal to be lonely as a teenager, and partly because the world has told him he needs to cut off from his emotions. What if he hears from all of these people in the manosphere that it is because of women, it is because of feminism that he feels this way? And it gives him somebody to blame. It's not me. It's because the world of women is against me.
100%. And that's why we're so excited to have you on this podcast. And because of the work we do with young men and boys in schools. You know, we work with all kinds of schools, but I have to say our work with single-sex schools is really exciting, because we can have these really hard conversations in their safe sphere. And although we're really encouraging some of these single-sex schools to bring in their sister and brother schools to the dialogue too, because that's a critical piece to make the bridge between the two sectors, and of course non-binary and LGBTQ plus students too. So I can't thank you enough for all these insights. Gosh, Katie, final thoughts.
I'm so grateful. I shared with Susan before we recorded that I was so excited for our community of listeners to get to hear from you. But selfishly, as a parent of two kids, I was so excited to just get to talk to you after reading your book twice and really like going through and underlining and highlighting. I was just so excited to get to talk to you and tell others that I got to talk to you and have them listen to the podcast, because this should be required reading for every parent and honestly every educator too. Anyone who's dealing with young people. I want to get that study from you that you gave to your child's kindergarten teacher and give it to my child's teacher, because it's just so important. So just thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm so the work you guys are doing is so incredible. And it's really thrilling to talk to people who really understand the importance of this book and really get the nuances of it. So thank you.
Absolutely. And Joanne, can you just remind our listeners, please, where they can find your book and resources?
Yeah, my book is available wherever books are sold, indies and online. You can find out more about me and about the book at joannefinkelstein.com. I also have a Substack called a newsletter that I send out every couple of weeks on Substack called The Feminist Parent.
I love it. It's amazing.
Me too. Me too.
And so it talks about parenting and it talks about current events, what politics, what's going on. And I'm also on social media at joannefinkelstein.phd.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. On behalf of our whole organization, you have a lot of fans here at I Have the Right To, and we love sharing your work with all the students and parents that we meet.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about our student and executive programming at our website at ihavetherightto.org.